Lou, would you be able to get me a... Hi, and welcome to Helicopter Investor Virtual. Sorry, it's not Helicopter Investor London for obvious reasons. We're as disappointed as you are. But today we're going to have a taster for next year's event. And we're going to start with the lessors. This was going to be a panel with 3 different leasing companies. It's now turned into one with 2, sort of. But we're delighted to have Olivier Pied, CEO and founder of Nova Capital, Crispin Maunder, Executive Chairman of LCI Aviation, and Pat Sheely, President and CEO of Milestone Aviation, the world's biggest helicopter lessor. Pat, let's start with you. How are you doing?
Oh, not too bad now. Obviously, as you said, we'd like to be there in person, but I think this is next best. At least we get something done today, and as you said, give people a taster for what might come in 2022. So yeah, excited to be here. Hopefully we've got a big attendance online and we can give them a little sample of what they might have got when they were in London.
Well, okay. And Olivier and Crispin, you've started the day with exciting news. Does one of you want to explain it?
We sort of got married.
Can you sort of get married?
Well, he's still keeping a certain amount of reservation. No, we're thrilled to announce today that LCI has acquired Nova Capital Aviation Ireland, which is Olivier's twin-engine helicopter business, both helicopter and fixed wing. And we're now forming a sort of general cooperation and collaboration so that I'll leave Olivier to talk about his business, but between us, we should be able to cover the whole helicopter spectrum.
Olivier?
News for us, it sort of caps, I mean, bearing in mind we haven't had a heli investor properly for 2 years now, it sort of caps the rather busy 2 years from our point of view.
Actually, it was only March. It's only 18 months since we had one. It will be 2 years.
Your timing was epic, Joel, because I think we were right on the eve of the pandemic the last time. Yeah. I just hope we're not right on the eve of pandemic Mark II this time.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, you're right. Last time we were hearing tales of it starting, and then again.
That's right. I mean, I think you got a great laugh when you put the picture of Cookie up with the mask on the screen behind us. Little did we know that was life for the next 18 months, or about to become life for the next 18 months.
Yeah,
and hasn't he changed in that period as far as his weight production is concerned? He looks very healthy now. Anyway, Olivier.
Oh yes, good afternoon, all everybody, and yes, indeed, what a journey and what a end of the year for us. Indeed, we are delighted to announce this morning our new partnership and cooperation with LCI. As Crispin mentioned, we are really excited about that. In more general terms, yes, indeed, LCI took over our twin engines and aircraft leasing operations, which is located in Nova Capital Aviation Ireland. I'm delighted with this transaction, as it will provide our joint companies will be able to cover the whole side of the business. Let's say now we are talking about helicopter, LCI on the twin engine side, and Nova keeping its activity, brand, etc. on mainly the single engine side, and some related business. So yes, indeed, we look a little bit tired, but it was some busy weeks we just passed through.
Yeah.
And Pat, you haven't consolidated or merged with anyone yet, have you?
Oh, I think given the size that we're at, I think there's not many more that we can gobble up. No, look, we've been continuously growing organically. Obviously, I think over the last decade, following the original acquisition by GE, we're 3.5 billion. We grew the book to just over 5.5 billion, 6 billion after that, and we've added think the equivalent of a lot of leasing companies to the book just through organic growth. That continues to be our modus operandi. We're really looking at growing the portfolio organically, continuing to deploy capital where we think it's prudent and where we see attractive returns and the right risk profiles. So from our perspective, it's more all about organic growth. We're not really looking at merging or acquisitions in terms of other leasing platforms.
Crispin, you've talked about consolidation a lot with operators. There isn't a lot more consolidation that can happen now with helicopter vessels, is there?
Not really, actually. I mean, we do need to have some diversity in the lessor sector, and I think you've now got. I mean, our focus is very much on the twin engine, so I will talk to the twin engine rather than the single engine, which is Olivier's sort of main focus going forward. But you've got 3 well-established aircraft lessors. Lobo is the 4th. But I think it's in a certain amount of restructuring going on there. But certainly, I think bearing in mind the size of the market and where we are today as far as the whole lessor spectrum is concerned, I think 3, well experienced, and let's face it, we have experienced a lot over the last 5-6 years, and we've put that to good practice. It's actually very analogous to how the aircraft lessor spectrum was back in the late 80s, actually, where you had 3 significant lessors in the form of GPA, ILFC, and Ansett Worldwide at that time. So, from that, maybe further lessors will grow as this market grows. Because we haven't yet, I mean, from a penetration point of view, we're still very, very low penetration compared to the total market.
And I think that's an interesting point. So, Crispin, sticking with you, where do you see your growth coming from?
Primarily organic growth. We're still taking deliveries of new aircraft. We're still working very closely with the manufacturers. And there is demand out there, but we do have some. I think altogether we do have some challenges in the market, perfectly, with regard to what's going on, for example, in the airline world and the fixed wing world. Although it doesn't impact us, it does overshadow us. And then of course we've got ESG to deal with and other things. But there is a lot of opportunity out there for us as well.
Olivier, one of the interesting things about your press release is you were saying that you're interested in exploring new markets, including advanced air mobility.
Yes, I would complete what just Crispin said. I think it's all about where you bring the value for your customer and the way you are structured for that. As you know, we are coming from 20 years, let's call it entrepreneurial adventure. We had up to now a very different setup than our fellows at LCI, Milestone, Macquarie, eventually Lobo, whereby, coming to a certain size. We announced last week being over the 100 aircraft mark, 500 billion. That's where it was a little bit, in my mind, some kind of a mark where basically you need to get more structure and have more capabilities in terms of global footprint, in terms of technical arrangement, transitioning, etc. Definitely, there are other fields of the market, such as the one that you mentioned in our press release, a single engine. We are not talking about fixed wing here, but the light utility fixed wing aircraft, which are basically doing the same kind of mission that we are dealing with in the onshore market. And let's say air mobility assets that are coming to us, whereby with an agile platform, with cost adapt for that, I think we can bring value to those customers and serve this market in an efficient way. So that's the reason why we made that transaction and focusing on the future on that thread. I do not see, to answer clearly your questions, I'm not sure that eVTOL, etc., would be on the lessor plate within the next upcoming years, because at the moment it's much more a business which is financed over the corporate or venture capital from the manufacturers of those assets. But definitely, once those assets will have to be, the financing of those assets will have to be taken into account somewhere down the road, and we would like to be ready to do so when time will come.
Olivier, what would be your biggest concern about financing early, either eVTOL or advanced air mobility or electric vertical aircraft, which I prefer as the term electric vertical aircraft. I should have used that. What's your concern? Is it residual value when something's new? You don't know if it's going to be replaced, or is it just the ticket size is likely to be too small?
This is exactly my point. The ticket size for a player like us is not really a problem, because we can adapt our structure or way of financing, and we are willing to design a cost-effective solution for that. My main concern, as everybody as a lessor, I mean, when you say lessor, the value we bring are around for a customer are around residual value. So definitely, until we don't have any, let's say, enough information to assess that residual value, that's the main concern. The second concern we would face over the next 2-3 years is that we are seeing a lot of manufacturers or projects popping up, and it will be difficult to assess which ones will be the one having the most reliable residual value. So that's where a lot of, I would say, market intelligence would be needed to be in position to invest in a reasonable manner in those new assets. But definitely, time will come.
Good. Pat, we've seen Avalon, the commercial aircraft lessor, place a speculative order. Have you got any interest in this sector?
Look, I think I'd echo a lot of what Olivier said. We're obviously watching it, but from my perspective, we're an asset-backed lender. So our first recourse is to the asset, and then we look at credit and other things after that. But we want to be confident in the asset, and I think there's two things. I think we've hit on residual value, and the second, which is linked to residual value from our perspective as an operating lessor, is redeployability. So until there is a product out there which I can pick up in New York and land in New Delhi, and find operators that can transition it from one to the other, I think it's very challenging. With regard to some of the orders that people have placed already, you could take a bet on the United balance sheet and lease whatever you want to United, but it's not particularly asset-backed lending. You're taking a credit bet on the airline at that stage and on the balance sheet. It's equivalent to buying bonds, because ultimately, as we sit here today, you have no idea what the residual value of that asset is going to be, or where you could put it if you ever got it back. So, well, I think there's obviously pros and cons to what others are doing, but I think from our perspective, we've always focused on the metal, focused on the asset. That's our primary recourse, and until we understand that and understand the residual and understand whether or not there's going to be broad adoption of one or more of these products, I think it's difficult to go in and scale at this point in time.
Crispin?
Well, I really echo both Olivier and Pat's views. It would be very unusual for a lessor to actually start placing orders on equipment that, shall we say, hasn't even been fully designed yet, let alone the infrastructure developed to allow it to operate commercially. But my other concern is that, with a few exceptions, most of the products that are actually out there in the market, and there are so many every day, you pick up another one. These are manufacturers or putative manufacturers that so far don't have any track record as far as product support, development, and the rest. So, going to Pat's point, which I fully agree with, we are asset lenders. And we do need to feel comfortable about the portability of these assets as well as the long-term residual value. And we have absolutely no idea. Shall we say, the yardstick in aviation has traditionally been 25-year economic life of an asset. But who knows? These are almost more disposable in some respects, potentially, I don't know. But certainly as part of that is going to be the manufacturer's support to an in-service helicopter, their ability to ramp up globally, and everything else. So it's not only the technology, but it's also the OEM infrastructure as well as the deployment infrastructure as well. So I think it's a very exciting prospect, but I still think we've got to look at this. It's moving fast, but we've got to be sensible about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think obviously as the largest rotary lender in the world here, and some of my colleagues as well, Crispin, now trying to catch up as best he can.
Thank you.
We've got to look at the space, and we do monitor it. But I think even the products that are out there, and these products are a number of years away from ever entering service. They don't particularly compete against our core product right now. What we finance, I think Olivia hit it well. They're sort of at the single engine helicopter and below. Probably there's a chance they will compete, but they don't have payload carrying capability. They don't have range capability. It's a very different asset class as we speak. Now, that's not to say it can't grow, but I do think for it to grow and be competitive with the aircraft that are in our portfolio right now, that's probably the best part of a decade away at least.
And I guess one of the worries is when you've got so much technological advancement that the version 1.0 could be redundant in 3 years.
It's the laptop effect. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
You got to be very careful.
Sticking with that though, we've just had the COP summit meeting. Crispin, what's your thoughts on offshore?
That's a very good point. Well, today, post the NCAI application, offshore oil and gas, it represents about 20% of our portfolio. We have a very, very limited exposure now. Wind is also offshore, and wind is growing off a small base. Indeed, the last survey I read, which was God, he'll shoot me. I can't remember.
Steve Robertson at Analytics.
I'm getting, anyway, he's estimating possibly about another 100 helicopters required for that sector, some 400 or 500 additional wind farms. Now, obviously, that's not a feast, but that's 10 aircraft a year, typically more. But the interesting point here is that if you look at the competitive landscape for wind, and then I'll move back onto offshore oil and gas, the competitor to a turbine helicopter, 135, 145, 169, like, going by sea, it's 300% more polluting in the context of CO2, for example, than a helicopter. So on the wind side, you've got an ESG sort of a tick box for wind, and you're presenting a helicopter that's actually going to be less polluting than the alternative by sea. And yet those very same wind operators are still migrating, fairly strongly towards sea as well, for cost reasons and so forth. So, there is a little bit of a cross message going on there. Now we move with that in mind across to oil and gas. Now, oil and gas are going to be with us for the next 10, 15 years. Yes, there is a trend to reduce reliance on it, but we will still be pumping oil at that time, and people need to get to the rigs. So, from my point of view, traveling by helicopter using those parameters is still less polluting than going by sea.
I mean, what I would say is if
you're supplying a service to what is going to be probably an industry in wind down.
I think that's right. But if you think about what the big takeaway from COP was, it was about an attempt to stop the world burning coal. Right? And in order to stop the world burning coal, there's got to be a transition fuel between coal and ultimately renewables. And that's going to be natural gas, more than likely. Oil and gas, but predominantly natural gas, particularly around China. So I think, any supply demand models you look at for oil and gas for the next 10 to 15 to maybe 20 years suggest that there is not enough proven resources, explored resources today to cover that demand by a long stretch. So between now and the end of this decade, there's going to have to continue to be oil and gas exploration. Gas in particular is going to be needed as a transition fuel. I mean, if you could stop China burning coal tomorrow and have them burning natural gas tomorrow, that would probably have the biggest impact on CO2 emissions in the world for the next decade. So I do think there is going to be a place for oil and gas. Certainly not just existing resources, not just existing wells, but also exploration. And we're going to have a shortage in terms of explored wells that need to be drilled, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years. But there's no doubt, I think over the next 20 years, it's going to be a situation where that industry is going to face a wind down. But it's a multi-decade wind down, and it's certainly not something that's going to impact, I would think, the installed fleet of helicopters today. They're well equipped to service that demand. Where you may see an impact is in 5, 6, 7, 10 years' time. What is the demand for an offshore super medium or a new heavy helicopter at that point in time? And I think that's something that the OEMs are going to have to look at closely in terms of their supply demand models. But I think for the installed fleet today, and as we continue to work through oversupply, I certainly think that there is going to be enough demand in offshore to utilize the current fleet and lead to an increase, I think, in utilization over the next decade or so.
Hal, if you can just let me add something to this. Being the guy being only onshore lessor up to now, and definitely not in the single engine in the future, there is an argument that I will complete what Crispin says, which basically I don't get neither. Is the all the ESG policy? It's very fine, but let's not forget that when people are operating oil and gas assets, they are also transporting people, eventually saving life, as we did with the EMS business. And secondly, we have seen recently a lot of progress in terms of cleaner carbon being used and clean by the AOM. So I suspect that we are still having their mission critical services operations, including saving lives, which can reduce the pollution of operating that drastically over the next years. So I think on the funding side, we have a lot of arguments to explain that this tick the box of a lot of ESG policy for investor lenders, etc.
That's a great question, a great point. We've also got a great question from Wei. Pat, you can have this. Crispin's touched on this. Well, actually, Crispin's answered his version. Will twin-engined helicopters like the 139, 169, 145 increase much more and occupy wind farm or SAR market?
Are you asking me?
Pat first, then you, Crispin.
I certainly think wind. I mean, 135, 145, 169, potentially 160, is the perfect machine for wind. And I think that sector, as Crispin pointed out, I think it's going to grow. I certainly don't think it's the panacea for growth. It's maybe 10, 15 units per annum at the outside, but certainly it's an area that's going to grow. And it will be those types. It will be 135s, 145s, 169s, and as I said, maybe the 160. So yes, I think that's the crux on the wind side. SAR, remains to be seen. I mean, I think depending on what your search and rescue mission is, you're in very hostile territory at times in very difficult conditions. To date, that's been more on the heavy side. Super mediums have started to have an impact there. 139 has done the mission as well in certain cases. Going lighter than a 139, I think, really depends on what conditions you're in. If you're in the Atlantic Ocean or if you're in the North Sea, it's not going to work. Maybe some smaller inshore type search and rescue missions, yeah, maybe. But I think that's going to be a medium, super medium, and heavy mission predominantly in search and rescue.
Yep.
Crispin, did you want to touch on that?
No, I agree with Pat there, actually. I mean, one has to factor in also on that 525 on the heavy side as well. But no, the light medium for wind and the super medium and heavy for SAR typically. There are 139 applications and possibly now 160s on more sort of inner shore SAR as well. But the big market is the heavy stuff.
Pat, talking about SAR, you obviously got a massive contract a few years ago with Bristow for the UK. It seems to be like a long and winding road for other countries to follow it. At the time, there was a lot of excitement about that. Obviously, there's Ireland and the UK. Are you more? Do you see that market speeding up, or are governments just too busy at the moment?
It's very slow. I mean, I think we have seen it around the edges. So I think we've seen, obviously, UK and Ireland have privatized. And I think that's working well, and both will be up for retender in the middle of this decade. Around the edges in Norway, we've seen some work there with the Norwegian government in terms of some privatization of SAR work there as well. Canada was one that people have waited for a long time, and there's a fleet of very old aircraft operating search and rescue in Canada, but again, very slow to move. I think it will move, and it will be lumpy when it does happen. Large, big ticket transactions, but certainly it's an area where demand is not linear. We're going to see big projects come on stream. They've been very, very slow, as you said. I think people thought when the UK led the way in terms of privatization of SAR work that might trickle faster across the globe, and it hasn't. But I do think it's going to be a growth market over the next probably decade, but very, very lumpy in terms of where demand is.
Yeah, we must remember, of course, that most of the SAR is deployed by military. So it's really down to the government and the military as to whether they're prepared to transition across, and air forces and armies tend to hang on to the stuff.
Olivier, you've been extremely successful with onshore EMS operations. Are you optimistic about that area?
Yes, definitely. There is a need for renewal on the first of all for a lot of machines. That's, I suspect, where one of the key factor for success for helicopters like 145 or 169. So definitely there are, the backlog and the delay you have to wait if you put a deposit now to buy one of those is for sure the demonstration that there is a success there. We are seeing, the pandemic period did not actually affect, as far as we see that in our portfolio, mainly the flight hours or the revenues of our customer, at least on this part of the business. So it's another demonstration of the resilience of that model, whereby you can rely on a long-term, back-to-back, most of the time, public contract. Let's say that my only, not fears, but maybe advice to us as a community is not to get into the same kind of misjudgment we made on the oil and gas. I mean, we need to keep. It's all about where an aircraft brings value to your customer, because at the end of the day, if it's not the case, it will become your problem as a lessor or eventually an ender or whatever. And a 145 or 169 aircraft, if you mentioned those very successful assets at the moment, cannot be operated by an operator for the same price in the same place than a 139 or a 109S grand aircraft. It doesn't make sense. So we just need to make sure that we are asset-based financer, and our key driver is the residual value and the quality of our assets. But we need to monitor closely the way our customers are making money with our assets in a decent way, with a decent margin. And that's where I suspect should be the not the gray zone, but where we should be careful with this big trend of new assets coming into the market.
I like that. So that's your piece of advice to the industry. Crispin, what's your piece of advice?
Actually, well, I will actually look at the 20% of our market or our portfolio, which is offshore oil and gas. My view on that is that there has to be a fast recognition that if they want new technology in offshore oil and gas and the latest state of the art in safety systems and so forth, that the end users have got to come to the party and help us as lessors or the banks as financiers actually come together and structure a viable business proposition for us to then go to the OEMs and place orders. It's a bit of a long-winded way of saying that, but perhaps Pat would be more eloquent in his response.
I like that, and before we, I think you should highlight that all the end users, because there are end users who are very constructive and do come to that.
One in particular, I know. Yes.
One of whom, Tony Cramp, has said,
I have that in mind.
I fully agree with Pat's timelines and continued need to service oil and gas for the next 15 to 20 years. Exploration is still happening. But Pat, so Tony's agreed with you already. Pat, what's your advice?
It's similar to Olivia, and it's twofold. It's one in the sector he talked about in terms of EMS and onshore, and one in terms of oil and gas. Just in terms of EMS and onshore, one thing we've got to be very careful of is that, we put in a 139 on a contract for 5 years in pick a country, Italy, France. At the end of the 5 years, Italy decides actually don't want the 139, want the 169, right? If that's the case, and that aircraft comes out after 5 years out of that mission and needs reconfiguration, etc., I've probably mispriced it the first time round, right? Because that's not what I would have assumed. And second time round, the price is going to change because once bitten, twice shy. And that's just going to lead to, we've got to price risk correctly. I think certainly in oil and gas, and to a certain extent, I think even in some of the smaller aircraft, the light twins and the mediums, we didn't price that risk correctly in the past. We've all a lot of experience over the last decade. I think we know collectively how to price it now. And that if there is a rush to new technology, that's fine, but people are going to have to pay for new technology. It's somewhat similar in offshore oil and gas, but in this space right now, and I've said this I think last year, and I think it still holds course. There is no need for more aircraft in offshore oil and gas for the next 3 or 4 years. Right, there is ample supply there as it is. There's still an oversupply on the heavy side. We've seen what can happen when that supply and demand balances and we get to a rational environment. We've seen it on the 139s. I think one of my predecessors at one of your conferences led an entire pitch around whether or not a helicopter was ever going to be a leasable asset. And I think there were question marks over that. I certainly at that point in time I thought there was question marks over that. I think what we have seen over the last 12 to 18 months, particularly around the 139, is that there can be a place that this asset class exhibits all the characteristics of an asset class which you should invest in. Right now, with the supply demand imbalance in 139s, we just did one yesterday. We took the aircraft back from lessee A, it went to lessee B. The aircraft was off lease for about 2 hours. That's the way it should work in a normalized environment. We're not there yet in offshore, that's for sure. We still have oversupply on the heavy side. But I think we are going to work through that. I think, I'm certainly bullish on offshore for the next number of years. I think we will see a balancing of supply demand as long as all the players remain rational and as long as we don't bring in significant number of new supply, which is not needed in the space.
Okay, brilliant. Although interestingly, you could probably now do the same thing about arguing whether commercial aircraft makes sense, which we won't do.
I've got a big brother who knows that space a lot better than I do now. So.
You were in it before then as well. Before we end, every year we ask you to score out of 10 the last year. This is so that one day we can have an index that people trade. Crispin, what would you score the last 18 months since the last Helicopter Investor Conference out of?
I can't remember what I said 18 months ago, but personally, I would say from LCI's point of view, 8 out of 10, purely because one always needs to have a certain amount of room for improvement. But certainly, it's been a very exciting 18 months for us. We've had a change in shareholding. The Libra Group, our parent company, bought out KKR. We exited fixed wing market at the beginning of 2020, and now we're just coming back in again tentatively. We've just concluded this transaction with Olivier, which I'm personally very thrilled about. And personally looking at the market, I think we've got a fairly good outlook compared to our friends in the fixed wing market. So altogether, 8 out of 10 certainly.
Can we read anything, and I'm not expecting you to answer this, into the fact that the founders of KKR both resigned on the day they left at LCI?
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock to them, I think.
Olivier, what would you score out of 10?
Are you seriously asking me the question? Can I answer 11?
Can you not see his smile?
You asked me that today, right?
I am now worried about the deal.
I have a good friend of mine who is attending your event. Now I suppose he's listening to me, but who told me you looks like the guy on the magic carpet flying over my home, actually. So that's I'm really joking about that. It's a fantastic year for us because we passed some important milestone figures in our fleet, and we have entered into a very exciting deal that we are very happy with. It is a very nice step in our 20 years history, and I hope that Nova Capital One will continue under this new partnership. But let's forget the joke for 1 second. I would say also that I would be really happy because under that 18 months period, we demonstrate the resilience of our business. Actually, we have transition. I know that Milestone also transitioned quite a very high number of aircraft over the past 18 months. And actually, this is, I believe, the best demonstration that we can give to any of our investor or financial partners or lenders that those aircraft are liquids. When you invest properly for the right price and the right place, you can rely on an aircraft that you can, as Pat says, brings from customer A to a customer B, and actually we were quite successful in doing that, not taking that much new helicopter over the past 12 months, but we are about to take the last ones, but resilience, and I think now we have passed the test, and that's for me as a very big value in our previous 18 months, let's say.
I'm just delighted that you came out higher than Crispin. You should have gone 7 because we gave away such a terrible. We were so battered down by Crispin.
Look, I think I'd echo a lot of what the guy said. I mean, I think we'd have. If I look back over the last 18 months, in terms of how the portfolio performed, in terms of how the team performed, in terms of the initial uncertainty around the pandemic, the uncertainty around our ownership structure, which got resolved. I think that this year we've got through an integration process there. We've got a new owner on board that's very supportive of the platform, and the resilience of the portfolio. I mean, I think one of the biggest things here is the portfolio performed exceptionally well under exceptional stress, in a macro environment that was under exceptional stress, and continued to do so. And as Olivier said, I don't have the numbers to hand, but it's plus or minus 85 or 90 aircraft that we transitioned or extended over the 18 months. It's a lot of aircraft to move. There's a big chunk of 92s in there as well, in terms of ones that extended, ones that we managed to start getting off the ground. So we're certainly seeing green shoots, I think, across the board in the portfolio. But the resilience of the installed portfolio over the period from January, February 2022 to sort of January, February 2020 to January, February 2021, I think was certainly the most satisfying thing from my perspective, because with very, very few exceptions, it all continued to perform exceptionally well. So number-wise, I'll go 8 out of 10 as well. We'll shoot for 10 out of 10 by 2023. But we can do it in person.
10 out of 10s when you retire.
Well, when I'm sitting with Olivia Smile, it'll be a 10 out of 10, right?
Pat, Al's going to remember this in 4 or 5 months' time.
Yeah, we'll be back. Thank you so much, Crispin. Olivier.
Thanks, Al.
Great seeing you, and thanks so much for joining us. Thanks
Cheers,
also
Al.
to
Thank you.
thank you very much, guys, and thanks also to all our sponsors: Milestone, Aero Asset, Airbus, LCI, Leonardo, Cirium, Nova Capital, and Protective Packaging Corporation. And let's quickly go to a short video from Milestone.
We are AerCap. We are the largest owners of commercial aircraft in the world, with over 2,000 aircraft, over 900 engines, and over 300 helicopters. We're a truly global company, serving approximately 300 airline customers around the world. Our team is the best in the industry, working out of a network of regional offices close to the markets that we serve. Over the past 5 decades, leased aircraft have become a vital tool for fleet planning. And today, over 45% of all commercial aircraft are on lease to airlines around the world. Airlines value the ability to finance their fleet without the need for large capital outlay, allowing them to grow their business in a profitable and sustainable way. AerCap buys aircraft in tremendous scale directly from the manufacturers. This scale, combined with our industry-leading team, enables us to provide comprehensive and tailor-made fleet solutions that are unrivaled in the leasing business. Our fleet is the most advanced in the industry, and by 2024 is expected to grow to approximately 75% new technology aircraft. Utilising our best-in-class trading platform, deep market insight and relationships, we have averaged over $5 billion of asset sales per year over the past 4 years. Our balance sheet is robust, with an investment-grade rating by all 3 major agencies, and we're backed by hundreds of the largest financial institutions in the world. We are a global leader in aviation. We are AerCap.
Hi, and welcome back to Helicopter Investor Virtual 2021. It's great to see so many of you on, hundreds of people joining us. Sadly, we can't be in London, but it's the next best thing is to be virtually until we can. Just a few quick comments on the last session. We've had some great questions, which we'll save for the next one. Tim Rolfe from Heli Offshore has also said, I agree with the point on the need to work together on what the safety investments must be to extend the life of the current fleet to safely grow into the tapering future of offshore oil and gas. And I think everyone watching would agree with that. We're absolutely delighted now to switch from leasing to storage. Delighted to have Steve Hanna, President and CEO of Protective Packaging Corp. Steve, that is an amazing trophy on the wall behind you. How are you?
Fine, Al. How are you doing?
Great to see you, and great to see your office. How's your business generally?
Generally, it's good. We're slightly behind last year's sales, but last year was the best year we've had since we've been in the business. So if we're coming in second to that, I'm all right with that.
And for those people who don't know you, how would you describe your business? What's your 1-minute elevator pitch?
Well, the name of our company is Protective Packaging, hence the name. We do provide flexible packaging for just about every industry there is in the world. A lot of emphasis in commercial aircraft, and a lot of emphasis, obviously, in the helicopter end of the business. But our goal is to provide long-term protection for assets that are going to be sitting idly by for X period of time, up to a year, 2 years, to provide that protection so they don't cost them a lot of money.
And what makes your company's unique, but what's great is you get a different viewpoint on the industry to everyone else. So how's your helicopter side of the business doing? Are you as busy as you were 2 years ago?
Well, no, we kind of look at the negative side of it as a benefit. When the price of oil went to hell and all the offshore rigs shut down, that was a bonus for us. When the 225 was grounded, again, that created a lot of work for us. So it was a good jumping off spot, and certainly along with your help and coming to the conference, our word got out and it spread, and our process has been proven effective and very cost efficient. So it's good and expanding, and we're getting into the military market now with a lot of their aircraft and helicopters, all of their helicopters that they send off to the bone alley. We now do their protective covering on them as their assets are grounded. So that's helped us out a lot as well.
And manufacturers have quite strict storage guidelines. And are they happy with your wrapping product? Yes,
they do. Yeah, and we were under the microscope, especially from the very beginning. And they were saying, "You're not changing the maintenance manual, are you now?" We said, "Heavens, no. That's the last thing we would do. We're just helping it." And with the process of the only way you can control the corrosion is to control the atmosphere around the product. And once you do that, then you're guaranteed to have no corrosion. And that's what we were doing to the helicopter. And it helped their maintenance process. And we now have approval from all the major OEMs of the helicopter industries. And we work a lot with the MROs. And our processes just kind of help us extend their pre-maintenance on their aircraft. If we can keep the moisture off of it, then maybe they don't have to change the oil as often or lube as often. But we work hand in hand with the maintenance guys, and we know that we're under a microscope on that. So we dot the I's and cross the T's.
Brilliant. Steve, great to see you. Sorry we couldn't be face to face, but look forward to seeing you soon next year.
I appreciate it. And I expected you would have had a lot more gray hair today, but obviously you're doing well.
It's all the lighting.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for having us, and we're looking forward to seeing you next year.
You too. Look forward to seeing you on. Thanks, Steve.
All right, guys. Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
And now, once again, thanks to our sponsors. And here's a short video from Leonardo. was a fantastic video, and welcome back to Helicopter Investor Virtual 2021. We're now delighted to have three experts who are going to give us the view on the future for helicopters. Delighted to have Jasper Jandu, the CEO of LCI, the person who does all the work at LCI, while Crispin does the lunches. Roberto Garagvali, Head of Strategy and Innovation at Leonardo Helicopters, and Luke Benetola.
Good afternoon, good morning.
Hi, Roberto. And Luke from Head of Sales and Marketing at Airbus Helicopters. Great to see all three of you. Roberto, start us off. What's your short-term forecast? How are you feeling about 2022?
It's better than we feared. Much better than we feared. I would say I would be rather optimistic in general as an industry, including the civil, which is experiencing a much better recovery. Of course, we are new into the Omicron variant of the virus. Hopefully, it will not be as bad as the UK border appears to be fearing at this moment, because we are all here because of the Omicron, but maybe it could have been handled differently. But jokes aside, I mean, we already seen a 21, which so far for the civil market is about 20% better than last year. In terms of deliveries, I hope and think the trend will continue upwards. Then we can go into the specific areas. Clearly, oil and gas remains with mixed feelings because of the good reasons that probably have been discussed before. I could not join with the other link, so I'm new to the discussion, I'm afraid, apart from the last 5 minutes. But overall, I would say good trend up.
Luke?
Good afternoon, Al. Well, I will just emphasize one element. I'm aligned with Roberto on terms of activity, but one element interesting to consider is the flight hours. When we look at 21, we are still below 2019 in terms of reference, but not too far. So I believe 22 is indicating that we will recover on flight hours. So again, fleet-wise, we see trends on different market segments, but it's a very interesting indicator of the flight hours that we anticipate a recovery for 22.
Jasper?
Yeah, thanks. Firstly, Al, thank you for your work this week. It must have been very stressful for you. No, I just agree with Roberto and Luke. I think we all know what's happened in the last, let's say there's been a 10-year cycle, and then the last 18 months. I mean, I think that's well known, but there seems to me, and I did hear the earlier comments about EV tolls and all the rest of it, this sort of bow wave of replacements. One can kick the can down the road for a little while. And it happened, for example, in fixed wing after 9/11. But at some point, new technology comes to the fore. One needs new aircraft. The existing aircraft get older. So, yeah, it's nice to talk about smaller, possibly niche markets today, and they will expand. But let's not take our eyes off the prize, which is, there's, let's say, 100 to 200 aircraft that will probably become over 20 years old in the next couple of years. The manufacturers are still putting out, let's say, 500 to 700 helicopters per year. So there's still a lot to do in the next 18 months. This could actually be quite a renaissance for the replacement cycle. So they are my thoughts, Alistair.
So that's interesting. So you're not, and I think that's a really good point. And it's easy to jump on the bandwagon of, the exciting thing. So your fundamental thing is, from all three of you, this is still a very strong, very viable market with a very good, in all sectors, future ahead.
Well, if I may, guys, yeah, indeed, which is a fair, let's say, broad statement, but I think we have to look at more details, segment by segment, because it really varies depending on the segment. There are a few that definitely, especially in 21, are proving to be resilient. I'm thinking here about private business aviation, I'm thinking about EMS, but there are some segments that are still needed to prove that they can recover. Indeed, the fleet renewal is an argument and an element to consider. In addition to the natural, let's say, replacement, I think innovation and technology will drive the change and may accelerate even some replacement. I'm thinking here in terms of carbon emission, CO2 emission, and and sustainable aviation, that might accelerate some replacement rate.
Roberto?
I would agree with Luke, and I think one of the main elements of our industry, the rotary wing industry, as OEMs, is that we serve both the civil and the military market, often with the same assets, with the sort of dual-use approach. This is a huge benefit because clearly and thankfully the cycles are not in phase, and it's a good phase for dual-use militarized helicopters. So the 139s that are operated for VIPs, and I'm just making the example for the 139, it could be the same for the 169 or even the 189 and 149, which is its military counterpart. There is a lot of demand for that, for affordable mass for the military, if you see what I mean. And this is especially useful, and I think this is industry-wide also for our colleagues in the industry, our colleague OEM, our competitors. We see a lot of traction. These new generation helicopters, and especially the AW family, has proven as very resilient and capable to be adapted to with mission systems for the military, and plus the benefits of having an affordable platform, which is also easy to maintain and not so expensive to maintain as a specialized platform could be. Of course, for certain tasks, for attack, you will still need a specialized helicopters, as we all know. But for many other duties, lift, troop transport, etc., the dual-use approach is good and helps a lot the production.
Yeah, can I just say, Al, just to round that off, look, we are all on this side anyway, suppliers in quotations. I mean, we've got two OEMs here. We ourselves, we supply capital, liquidity, and assets into the market. Really, let's flip the script and say, what about the demand side? Which is, and by the way, helicopters has not really been an 18 months issue. It's really been let's call it 5-6 year issue. You know what's happened in the mid-10s. Which is if new helicopter types are acquired with the latest safety systems, and older aircraft progressively are less capable or very expensive to update, then yeah, why not? You will see, as Luke says, a replacement demand if people are demanding the latest generation technology helicopters in certain segments. So there is nuance in the statement that there is replacement demand, yes.
In fact, there's a comment from Tony Cramp. From an end customer point of view, we still want to be able to enjoy the benefits of new technology, lower emissions, safety enhancements, lower operating costs and maintenance burden, etc., which agrees with you guys. Talking offshore, we've got a question from Alistair Fallon at IBA Group. Looking into a crystal ball for guidance, when do you imagine, Jasper, you can go first for this. When do you imagine the balance will be right and the current fleet supporting offshore will be sufficient and not an oversupply to requirements? 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure if it's entirely knowable, so we're all hazarding a guess. Look, it's really a function of two things, supply and demand. I mean, if everyone's watching their screens right now, the oil price is incredibly volatile. It's unwise to make such premonitions when things are moving up and down 10-20% in literally a couple of weeks. So I lean on a couple of things here. One is there was a very interesting report. Al, if you could share this link afterwards, that would be great, from Rystad, talking about the break-even deep water rates. And you're looking at kind of mid $40 a barrel for that sort of stuff. So listen, if there's a sustained increase or stabilization in the oil price, and suddenly deep water and ultra deep water fields come back on, then suddenly we're back in the good days. So it's very hard to say, Alistair, and to Al, the underlying question, exact timeline. It really is a function of supply and demand.
In fact, we've made it a poll so everyone in the audience can answer. Roberto, do you want to talk about oil and gas supply and demand?
Yes, I have a few numbers here. I've run a few numbers using the usual suspects, which is the Syrian database, and it's interesting. The nominal fleet for offshore is still about 1,400 helicopters worldwide. Of these, about 47% just short of half is intermediate. So intermediate for us is the 12-seaters, right? And half of those intermediates are 139. The other tend to be older generation models, and I think there is still room for more 139s or more helicopters in this category to enter the market. I mean, some of them are the 76s, especially the older version of the 76. I mean, A2C++, some 412s, etc., which are still in service. So I think the process of renewing the fleet with newer technology is not over yet. The super medium have been introduced into service just as the first crisis hit in 2014-15. So they remain a good potential to replace the big helicopters. The good thing about the intermediate, and I would call the 139, with all due respect for Airbus, the A320 of helicopters. It's everywhere. I mean, it's a helicopter which can be used for multiple roles, and really it has proven its resilience and its capability to adapt to different roles, as I was trying to say this before. I think the 189 and the super mediums in general can provide about the same capability of 90% of the capability that the heavier, the 19-seaters could provide, at a fraction or at a considerable reduced cost. This gives flexibility in costing, lower cost per seat nautical mile, especially if you look at the price and the support cost. So I think the crisis hit at a time when the industry started to change the inventory. But this is not over, and clearly, as somebody has already commented, there is still a sort of a large excessive supply which needs to be reabsorbed in the next few years. But it will depend on many market forces: the leasing rates, the demand, the possible resurrection of demand, and exploration in certain areas. But we will need to see how the oil and gas company will behave now that there is a very strong decarbonization agenda, which was not as strong when the crisis originally hit. So it's a very complex scenario. But I think that focusing on efficiency and providing value in general to the industry is the best way we can face this the situation at this time.
Luc?
Yeah, first, Roberto, thank you very much for taking Airbus as a benchmark. You to the A320. Thank you. Now, to answer your question, and as we are in this panel about the future of our industry, I'd like to take another angle about the offshore, is speaking about the wind farm. Because here I believe we have an interest to look at the market from an helicopter standpoint. We see very much so, this is still not mature market. But speaking about the end user, you spoke about the user earlier. We see the energy companies going big time on the wind farm, let's say, development. There are a couple and even a lot of projects happening. So I think there is an interest here to look at maybe with different platforms, but for the wind farm industry development, which is still very much maritime, those days. So there is probably an action to be taken from an helicopter industry standpoint, all actors. The helicopter as an asset, valuable for both building a wind farm, windmill, and shore element, and also the operation. So that's something I'd like to open for consideration for future business.
Okay, that's great. We're getting lots of debate going on about after Tony's comment about needing to pay. Mike Platt from Jasper's colleague has come back saying you need to listen to things about limited life horizon. We've got another great question, which is following on, Luc, for you actually, and it follows on from Crispin earlier talking about how offshore wind transport by helicopter is 300% less polluting than shipping. Bobby's saying, how can you convince and promote the lesser polluting helicopter option in offshore wind? Luc.
Yeah. Well, as I said just earlier, it's a question of the entire industry. It's not only maybe one to be convinced. It starts with the definition of the field they're trying to build for an offshore windmill. That goes up to the OEM and the lessor. It's something that we have to look at all together. I'm not sure one has to take the lead on that. Second element here. It's still a mature industry. So I believe there will be a combination of both maritime use and helicopter, especially in certain weather conditions and operations.
Okay, Roberto, I've got a question for you, which you're not going to want to answer, from Terry Spruce. And are we likely to see an electric-powered 139 or 169?
Not anytime soon. I mean, we are looking with a lot of interest at this industry, and this is the most I can say about what we are doing. But I mean, not in my lifetime, although I hope to live much longer. I would say electric.
You mean
Sorry?
Not in your professional lifetime?
Yes. Appreciate your precision. I am in my late 20s now. So no, I would say electricity for the time being is for something which is light. I mean, the technological equation make it good for short range, light load, and preferably not for a lot of hovering. So just to take off and land, and then to fly straight within a city, within an urban area, or carrying people or cargo or both, but not big things. We are not there yet. I mean, technology needs to advance much more. I mean, the amount of energy, and I will not bore anybody, but the amount of energy that is inside 1 liter or 1 kilo of JP4 or Jet A1 compared to the energy that is in a 1 kilo of equivalent battery, also taking into account the efficiency, the thermodynamics, is about 20 times more in the fuel than in the electric. So, and physics is the same for everybody. The rules are the same. So today, this is where we are going, and this can improve a little bit in the next few years. So, but before it gets to the level where you can install batteries, and by the way, when you have batteries on board, you are not more performing because you have less mass of fuel on board. I mean, the mass will always be with you, so which is another element to take into account. So to make a long story short, we need to be patient. We are at the beginning of a wonderful, potentially wonderful, hugely interesting trip. It will be a long trip before we go there. And when you go to high masses, we will have hit about 10,000 139s produced. Still going to the A320 comparison.
Luke?
Is this clear? I mean, did I make my point, hopefully?
Yeah, you want me to tell you when the 139 will be electric? No, I will not answer this question. But I'm aligned here that it's a matter of technology for our helicopter, which is more to be looked at what we do in urban air mobility than on the long range. So it's really maybe a new segment to be developed here, but full electric propulsion will be relevant for a short distance, definitely, or as a hybrid version for a safety element around crowded areas. So that's why we invest in this development right now.
Jasper, hearing that, and I'm guessing you're not expecting to be leasing electric helicopters next week, but ESG is a massive issue. And so we're still going to have helicopters burning jet fuel, as Roberta discussed, for many years. What's your thoughts on ESG? And also, you have to borrow just about as well from banks who have ESG policies.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Now we could fill a conference with this. So there really is I wouldn't call it a tsunami. There really is a bow wave of also ESG sentiment in the world. So I think I heard earlier, if you look at COP26 and IATA and ICAO and what's happening in the fixed wing world, we're talking net zero by 2050. And a large proportion of that, let's say 65%, is going to be SAF fuel. The rest will be other improvements in aerodynamics, et cetera, et cetera. So this genie is out of the bottle. And, we're all aware, I think, in the helicopter space of certain developments in certain areas. Leonardo, by the way, ESG is quite a broad church. I mean, it's actually a collection of many things. You see Leonardo with some diversity awards. You see SAF fuel on certain aircraft tests, as you may have read, with ADAC and S92s and 525. So we're just starting this kind of process of ESG. But yeah, we are out in the commercial market looking for capital. And now that capital is asking questions and is being asked questions, right? So we're talking about your environmental footprint. What do you consume as a company? These are under a rubric called Scope 1, 2, and 3. So whether you're an airline or an operator and you're burning fuel directly, or whether you say, well, I'll lease this helicopter, so fine, it's somebody else's problem, we get trapped via Scope 3. So it really doesn't matter. The carbon emissions are being calculated somewhere, right? Yeah. So the trick is now, and I really would say this not only to the people here, but to everyone listening, these rules are being written right now. The whole, again, without getting too technical, the whole EU taxonomy, the whole industry is being written right now. And we as a helicopter industry have a great opportunity to focus on the S of ESG, right? So when we talk about public missions, the EMS, search and rescue, we really have a way to say to people, hey, listen, yeah, we burn Jet A1 and that may turn into SAF fuel. I mean, these are machines, but look what we do on the other side. So Al, one of my main messages here is today, there's no IATA of helicopters. Right, so there's a coordination problem. I mean, you could try to email me and I'll try to feed this back as best as I can. But Al, we have a chance while the rules are being written to promote helicopters and the S in ESG. So they are my quick thoughts. I'd appreciate what Luke and Roberto have to say as well.
Yeah, well, sorry, go ahead.
Luke. Go ahead, Roberto.
No, just building on what Jasper just said. I mean, although the blunt answer to electricity, pure electricity on 139 or this sort of a category of aircraft is not going to be imminent, I think the SAF is another thing. I mean, the sustainable aviation fuel have a good thing since they are taken from organic matter. They do not introduce other carbon into the atmosphere. So you are not resurrecting the fossil fuel where the carbon is no longer in circulation. This is the big difference. And this is an area where even within my professional life, I think we'll see some progress. Most of the engines which are today produced and in service on our helicopters can accommodate. So it will be mainly a matter of economics and supply of SAF, which are still a bit challenging from that point of view. But this is an area where industry can work with the energy providers, which are our ultimate customers when it comes to transportation. So I think this is a very exciting also to address specifically the E part of ESG. And I think all the OEMs and especially the engine OEMs are working hard with the aircraft and airframe OEMs to work on this issue. And we are clearly pretty active on this as well.
Yes.
Look once.
Yeah, so we'll add something here. I think it's clear to everybody that this crisis has accelerated this move to look at how we impact the environment. Airbus has clearly announced our ambition to pioneer the sustainable aviation, and with the announcement about zero E by 2050. So we are clearly on it. The S element is very interesting. I will add, even if not in the acronym, the I for industry. Our industrial footprint, the way we manufacture, the logistic chain. I mean, it's massive. And Jasper, you're right. We may have a symposium about it. Looking at the first one, which is how we invest on our helicopter development, engineering with the SAF, but going even further on the industrial chain. It's really where we can make the change. And in terms of social responsibilities, definitely the video we had just before, Saving Life, well, it said it all. So more than happy to continue on this forum on that.
Yeah, can I just add? I agree with both. Al, sorry, can I just add something there? Which is, listen, there's a lot of capital in the world. Yes, we're now worried about some inflation, interest rates may go up, but there is still an enormous wall of capital. And it's very rare that a spigot to any industry just gets turned off overnight. That's quite unheard of. I mean, things like, gambling and tobacco, I mean, industry sectors still get financed. But there is an increasing friction to doing certain sectors, even in helicopters, and probably applying to older fixed-wing aircraft as well, and certainly old ships as well. I mean, this is not just a helicopter problem. So you may find that A, the availability of capital decreases, number two, the frictional cost of getting it increase, and number three, the cost of that capital increase. So it neatly ties back to what I said earlier, and what I think Tony mentioned on the Q&As. Yeah, we all want the best kit, the latest kit, the safest kit, but someone's got to pay or underwrite the risk that we're taking for deploying that capital. Okay, so when we're in the market now, we obviously have a certain part of our business is oil and gas, but not the majority, as Crispin says. We are trying to find efficiencies elsewhere to counteract that, but it's not a one-on-one relationship. So all I can say is I just trust that people appreciate the coal face that we're seeing somewhere else. Al, that's my comment.
That's brilliant. We've got loads of comments on the session. Tony Cramp saying that wind needs the operators, OEMs, and financiers to team up and make the compelling case. Tim Rolfe from Heli Offshore is pointing out that there needs to be an aligned industry voice to secure a proportion of the limited available sustainable aviation fuel for the helicopter industry, because they're well down the demand league. That's actually a key point. And then there's a fantastic debate going on about reconfiguration costs, started by Sarah at Ascend. And Emmanuel Papa has also put in a great argument about balancing and configuration charges, as does Sharon Desfor. Finally, Jasper, I remember talking to you when London was in lockdown and you were walking around an empty city of London, finding finance. Are you feeling short term? We've had a terrible cycle, almost from 2006 onwards. Are you feeling that the industry's slowly climbing out and now's the time to be optimistic?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we just got to put some optimism back into this and ourselves, which is, listen, the last 18 months have been hard on us all personally as well as professionally, but it's time to make some new money. I mean, this is the business we're in. So I wouldn't say climbing out. I mean, it's actually been a relatively interesting 2 or 3 years if you were there for the right deals. So, I mean, the market's still there. So, yeah, we're very optimistic. There's lots of capital out there. We're providing assets and capital to a market that needs it in abundance. All I say is that we are underwriting a certain risk over a certain period of time, and that equation has to balance for us, because we are in turn taking that to other people and saying, hey, listen, helicopters are a sound investment compared to many, many other things. So yeah, Al, very positive as to what the next 18 months may bring.
And Luke, we had a great Olivier Piot from Nova had a piece of advice to the industry. What would your piece of advice be to the industry for the next few years?
Well, I think we are getting to a time where everybody gets more and more knowledgeable and clear about what we expect. So we are more and more, let's say, professional, even if we are very professional in our industry. But I see a trend where in each and every segment, our customers, our partners are very, very, let's say, accurate on what they expect. So it is driving us to be more, let's say, precise. So I like this emulation that comes from the industry. So let's continue to be really expect more, and we will get more, because we have to create on this still low market more value out of it.
And Roberto, that's a great advice. Roberto, what's your piece of advice to the industry?
Well, my advice is to keep doing well what is good for the industry. I mean, we have been focusing on improving safety over the last few years. So crossing fingers, this is happening, and we are still putting the same level amount of effort. Safety can only go one way. So this is a a fundamental part of our constitution as OEMs, and certainly as Leonardo Helicopters. Keep giving more value to the customers by reducing operating costs as much as possible, by improving the reliability. There are things which don't know any sort of crisis that you must keep on doing whatever the circumstances, because they are an intrinsic value to the industry, to the customers, and this is where we believe our road will continue. There are things that we cannot control. I mean, pandemic is what in a contract is normally considered as an act of God, although it was not explicit in many contracts, as we discovered, but now it will be very explicit in some contracts that we are also have to sign. But I think I remain optimistic, and pandemics will start living with it, and there will be a tomorrow. The dark night will eventually end. There will be a new dawn, and things will restart in a different way, because clearly, as the environmental agenda is going to be very important. I think we need to remove a little bit of emotion from it and do our job, making our calculation. I mean, we must rationalize it, and that we need to think what is the best way that in our industry we can do and there are great things we can do to support this agenda as well. So my advice is think and do well what you need to do, and we all know what we need to do.
And you can't argue with any of that. Thank you so much, Jaswal, Luke, and Roberto. And we're now going to have a quick video from LCI. That was a really nice video from LCI. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors: Milestone, Aero Asset, Airbus, LCI, Leonardo, Cirium, Nova Capital, Protective Packaging, and also Paturon Valuations, who I find hard to, I need to check the pronunciation on it. So who better to help me do that than Gerard Determe, CEO and founder, and also Sarah Darawal, Valuations Manager for Ascend by Cirium. Gerard, please, can you correct my pronunciation?
Yes. Hi, Hal. Thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity for me to talk to you all with a new hat, as many of you know. Well, Pteron, it's a P-T-E-R-O-N. It should ring a bell because it's part of helicopter, and Pteron means wing. It's a wing, and heli means helix, a spiral. So this is how the word helicopter was born, and I just took the Greek word Pteron Valuations. It refers to.
And I do love the name. I think it's a great name. Awesome name.
Yes. Yeah, no, I got good feedback, and no, I love the name. At least a good opportunity to initiate discussions and to explain the word, and there is a very close link with the word helicopter. This industry that we love and that we are in.
And it's also great to have Ascend by Cirium, another new name. Sarah, how are you?
I'm very good, Alistair. Thank you. How are you?
Right. I'm good. It's great seeing you guys all virtually. It would be nice to see you in real life. But let's follow on from the themes we've had today. And one of the key themes has been ESG, environmental, social issues. Environment has really been the key one, and oil, and we've talked about COP. Gerard, what's your thought on, is this all affecting offshore helicopter valuations?
Well, when you consider actually what many issues have been addressed today by previous speakers, we are still going to need helicopter in the oil and gas world for the next 10, 15, 20 years, definitely. Even further exploration is going to be performed. We need helicopters. So even though oil could look like a sort of a dirty world nowadays, but in fact, helicopters will be a key asset to continue producing and pumping oil. And therefore, helicopter values should keep up to date and in pretty good shape. So the oil and gas industry is still going to need helicopters, therefore values should keep hold.
Sarah?
I
Yeah,
completely,
Yeah.
I completely agree with Gerard. I think whenever something like COP26 happens, you see a flurry of discussions, some of which will eventually fade away. But I think one of the important things is to look at who signed up for COP26. Not the entire world did that. And us in the Western world, we might start looking at reducing our emissions in that way, whilst large part of the worlds are not going to. So yes, we're still going to need oil, we're still going to need gas for the foreseeable future. However, I think the challenge that we still have with values for the offshore sector is the excess that is still in it. And I think the last couple of years have really exposed that excess in a different way. I think 2018-19 started seeing a bit of an increase in rig count, and we saw some exploration projects on the horizon which brought some green shoots, or we called them seaweed at the time, Alistair, to the industry. But unfortunately they have faded away over the course as the pandemic has sort of continued. So it hasn't been a direct effect of really anything to do with environmental focus or indeed the COVID pandemic. It's just a I think the helicopter industry is very exposed to the demand of oil and the amount of oil rigs in service.
As far as still helicopter values, I mean the key issue is still the excess capacity in the oil and gas fleet, which has been addressed today by previous speakers. That is still definitely a factor affecting downwards values, but yet that is not the same depending on the product segments. Not all products are affected the same. So this is definitely through the product angle that these offshore values should be looked at. Definitely the heavy segment, which will still be needed in the future. So there's still room for heavy helicopters and therefore for good return on that. But yet there is still a too big of a capacity in that sector, and with the super medium pushing up. So that is still a key factor affecting helicopter values in the offshore sector.
I think you're on mute, Alistair.
So sorry.
I think it's the first time we've said that in this session. So
I know, and it's me, which is more embarrassing. Sarah, how do you earlier you asked a question about supply and demand in offshore, and you said, how do we anticipate reaching supply-demand balance? Retirements, redeployment, or reconfigurations? What's your answer to your question?
This is what I've been debating. I think it could be any two. Now, I must say that I was encouraged by you saying that there's been a hot debate about reconfigurations following my comment about the 139. Now, I haven't been able to see that whilst I've been in the sort of green room waiting to come on, so that's why I haven't been able to reply there. I think the reconfiguration route is extremely difficult, especially for the machines that we are looking at, which are the medium twins and the heavies. The medium twins perhaps not as expensive, but the S92 we know is extremely difficult to reconfigure. And also, what market would you deploy it to? So I think that is a thing that perhaps is less likely. I think what we need to look at is either reduce the amount of fleet through retirements, possibly, or wait to see if the market will indeed return to capacity levels, which I think perhaps is less likely, or it might be a combination of the two. To go back to Gerard's point, absolutely, I think the heavies are still going to be needed in the future. It's the only heavy that we really got, and it is going to be needed, but we've got quite a few of them. The 139 will also play a big part in the fleet mix moving forward. However, what we have noticed is there's a big capacity in, if you look at the production profile, there's a lot of helicopters that were produced and delivered during the height of the oil and gas upturn, which is now coming up to 10 years ago. So a lot of those machines around that 2011, 2014, 15, they are getting on a little bit with regards to age. And that's where it becomes very interesting to see how the markets are going to react moving forward with regards to what you've been talking about with the environmentally sustainable program. So I think the next few years are going to be extremely interesting to watch.
Jared?
Yes. One aspect with respect to future, upcoming investments, and in terms of future residual values, one thing that we can consider is that helicopter assets will have a normal useful life of max 25 years old versus more than 30 to 33 back in the early 2000s. So therefore, in terms of residual values, market values trends in the future, I think investors should consider that these assets, and because of technological changes as well, requirements in terms of environmental regulations, we should count on shorter lives of helicopters. And actually, this is what the OEM do with offering modern technology, newer technology, and this is going to accelerate the replacement of older aircraft. And as Sarah said, the older heavies in particular, more than 10 years old, 12 years old, will reach more rapidly the end of their life in another 8 years, 10 years, but certainly not longer.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I'm going to move to, if you had to pick a sector where you're seeing interesting value or fleet trends, not offshore, which one would you think people should be looking at? Sarah?
Well, I think the corporate sector has shown really great signs lately, but we know from the last global recession that the corporate industry is very, very reliant and very reactive to any fluctuations in wealth. So I think perhaps that would be a little bit more unstable in the long term, let's say. The EMS sector has grown really steadily for the last 10 years at an average of 1.2%, which is not lots, but it's been steady and it's been consistent. I think perhaps we're going to see a little bit of acceleration of that moving forward. So I guess that's one to watch. But I would say as well, and I agree with the previous speakers, that it's really important that we show constraint, because the more helicopters you churn out to a market, the more volatile it gets with regards to the supply-demand equilibrium. And what values are most reactive to is that equilibrium. So we've got to keep that in mind.
Gerard?
Yes, EMS, definitely. This is secured sector. Usually operators they can get 10-year contract, and look at Nova Capital. I mean, Olivier has done a great job in that sector, because he's managed to do extremely well with this sort of mission segment. So in terms of values, I mean, this is excellent to maintain proper residual values and secured investment. It's not great numbers, not necessarily, even though there are still interesting rooms ahead of us in Europe or in other countries in the world. So definitely, with light twins, definitely an area to go to, especially in terms of values, residual values.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you soon in London in 2022, and thanks very much for your time.
We look forward to it. Yeah, thank you
Thanks
very much.
for having us, Alistair.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks again to our sponsors, Milestone, Aero Asset, Airbus, LCI, Leonardo, Sirium, we just heard from Sarah, Nova Capital, Protective Packaging, and Terron Valuations, which is still a fantastic name. Thank you so much for all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you all soon, hopefully face-to-face in 2022. I'm sure it will be. And wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Thank you very much. And we'll just end with one more video.